Welcome back to Spoiler Free Wrestling, everyone. And Chris Jericho released an episode of his Talk is Jericho podcast this morning. And on the episode, he releases a lot of information that had not previously been known regarding just how long he's been in talks with Tony Khan and how long has All Elite Wrestling been planned for. So Jericho spoke on the podcast that the first time he had heard the name Tony Khan actually came up in a group text chat that included himself, Cody, the Young Bucks, Chris Jericho, and Kenny Omega. Now, on the podcast, Jericho spoke about how he created this group text chat to help organize the Chris Jericho Rockin' Rager at Sea. So a quote from Jericho on his show regarding this group text chat that eventually led to Tony Khan's name coming up. Jericho said, "We're group texting, we're becoming friends, making jokes, laughing, talking about the cruise, all this different stuff. Then I started hearing about this guy Tony Khan. And Tony Khan was also brought to his attention by his manager Barry Bloom. And Bloom said to him, there's a guy who wants to start a new company. His family is very wealthy. He's the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he wants to talk to you." Now, it's important to note, all of this is going on in the summer of 2018. This is before All In. So Barry Bloom is talking to Chris Jericho about Tony Khan wanting to start a wrestling promotion before All In has taken place. And Jericho would drop another bit of information on the podcast regarding Tony Khan's involvement in Jericho getting to All In. So Jericho said that when he was first approached about meeting with Tony Khan, he didn't give it a lot of thought, as lots of people want to start wrestling promotions. But at around that time, he was contacted by Cody to perform at All In, which, if you remember, was September 1st at the Sears Center Arena in Chicago in 2018. So this is all going on in the summer. And at first, Jericho didn't think that he'd be able to be at All In because he was on tour at the time with Fozzy. But Nick Jackson evidently made the pitch for him to dress up as Pentagon, be on the show and then be on the show as a way to help promote his cruise, which was going to set sail at the end of, or did set sail at the end of October. So Jericho being on All In just 2 months before his cruise is set to sail is, a chance for him to promote his big cruise. But Jericho, again, he was on tour with Fozzy at the time, so how was he going to get to All In? Well, he flew on a private jet, and that private jet was provided for by Tony Khan. So Tony Khan is flying Chris Jericho into All In on September the 1st. That's how long ago Chris Jericho and Tony Khan had, how long ago Tony Khan had been involved in All In some way. Now, Jericho's band Fozzy played a concert in Jacksonville about 4 weeks after All In on September 26th. And here, Jericho says he met with Tony Khan while he was in town. So Jericho said, "We happened to have a Fozzy gig in Jacksonville, Florida, around that same time, September 26th. That was when I had a meeting with Tony Khan for 4 hours and really had a chance to get to know this guy. That's when I realized this guy really wants to do this." He would continue on the podcast to talk about just the passion that Tony Khan demonstrated or exhibited for pro wrestling. So he had piqued Jericho's interest at this time. And of course, after flying Jericho to All In his private jet, I think Jericho's ears are opened to what Tony Khan had to say at this point. And Jericho talked about the original offer he had from AEW. All these quotes, by the way, are available at SEScoops.com, which is a website I'm a writer for. Also up there, we had an exclusive interview with Cody, where he talked about win-loss records and rankings possibly playing a role in All Elite Wrestling moving forward. And there's more notes from that interview that are going to be released in the coming days. So watch SEScoops.com for that. So Jericho, on the first offer he got from All Elite Wrestling, he said, the original offer that came in was like, it blew my mind. This is like a real, almost NHL level offer. I have to remember, Jericho's dad played in the NHL, so that's the top sporting league he goes to. And Jericho would continue to say that after the cruise, he realized he just really enjoyed what he was doing. He enjoyed the people he was working with. He enjoyed doing things differently. And he also enjoyed his relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling. And Jericho makes a point of saying his contract with All Elite Wrestling, which is an exclusive contract for 3 years, specifically allows him to compete for New Japan Pro Wrestling if he wants to. He didn't mention that any other promotion was named as being permitted for him to perform on. It was an exclusive contract, but the exclusivity is waived as it concerns New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I would have to imagine that that's the same deal for Cody, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega, assuming he signs with the promotion as well. So Jericho addressed the many statements he made over the years that he would never work for a wrestling promotion in the United States other than WWE. He addressed that on the podcast. He said that was the case. That was very much the truth when all of this started. Basically, what happened was I finished up with the WWE. I believe it was in May of 2017. That's when I ended up losing the U.S. title to Kevin Owens. He then explained he did an injury angle, and then he was gone. Jericho's band released that Judas song, and they went on tour for 19 months, and he didn't have a lot of time for wrestling or WWE for a long time until he got a call from Don Callis in the summer of 2017 asking if he would be interested in wrestling Kenny Omega in the Tokyo Dome in the new year. And so Jericho said the original plan had been for him to just wrestle one match in the Tokyo Dome, and when he explained this to Vince McMahon, Vince was very accommodating. Once he got to Japan, however, Jericho realized that he enjoyed working with New Japan Pro Wrestling, and what he made a point of mentioning in the podcast is that he enjoyed how wrestlers are able to sort of run their own angles and to be creative, and there wasn't this feeling there is in WWE where everything stops and starts with Vince McMahon. So he continued to say that after his Tokyo Dome match with Kenny Omega, it was his idea. He pitched to New Japan Pro Wrestling for him to attack Tetsuya Naito at New Year's Dash. And he said he did that free. He did that free of charge. He had nothing signed with New Japan Pro Wrestling to continue after that. Just thought it would be a good idea to get his heat back and start a potential angle. But he mentioned that Vince McMahon did seem a little perplexed when he came out at New Year's Dash. He would later say that he received one of the best payoffs in his career for one night to work the Greatest Royal Rumble show in Saudi Arabia for WWE. But after the Greatest Royal Rumble show, he eventually told Vince that he had signed a new 3-match deal with New Japan Pro Wrestling. And at the time, he was scheduled to wrestle The Undertaker in a casket match at the next Saudi Arabian show, Crown Jewel. Oh, wait, no, he was supposed to do it at the Greatest Royal Rumble. Yeah, he was supposed to wrestle The Undertaker at the Greatest Royal Rumble. He ended up just participating in the Greatest Royal Rumble. That might be wrong. Regardless, he did some stuff with WWE in Saudi Arabia, received a big payoff for it, but after he told Vince that he had signed a 3-match agreement with New Japan Pro Wrestling, he was removed from the casket match with The Undertaker, and Rusev was put back in the casket match with The Undertaker. Now, Jericho says when he asked Vince McMahon about this, Vince said it was because the Saudi prince requested Rusev be in the match, but Jericho doesn't think so. He thinks he was taken out of the match because of his increased relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Now, Jericho would also mention that after winning the IWGP Intercontinental Championship in New Japan Pro Wrestling, he pitched an idea to Vince McMahon on an Intercontinental Champion versus Intercontinental Champion match at SummerSlam against Seth Rollins, but Vince was not interested. So, from there, it seems like Vince was a little bit more uneasy about promoting Jericho, considering the increased role Jericho was playing with New Japan Pro Wrestling. But Jericho says that ultimately, when he informed Vince McMahon of the contract offer he received from All Elite Wrestling, him and Vince ended things on a good note. He didn't get into if there were any counter offers made. It sort of sounds as though Vince recognized he wasn't interested in offering the same amount of money to Jericho that Jericho was getting from All Elite Wrestling. I mean, that's just speculation based on kind of how Jericho worded everything. But Jericho was quick to say, look, WWE and me had a great relationship for close to 20 years. And the difference between All Elite Wrestling in 2019 and WCW in 1996 is All Elite Wrestling is not trying to beat Vince McMahon. All Elite Wrestling is trying to exist independently of what the WWE is doing. Whereas WCW, this was a vendetta Ted Turner and Vince McMahon had against each other. That's not the case here. It certainly doesn't sound that way. And finally, Jericho also mentioned on the podcast that he met with Impact Wrestling and received a very good offer from Impact Wrestling, but ultimately he turned it down. Jericho said, regarding Impact, they were going to spend some money on Chris Jericho. I did honestly talk to Impact and really, really thought about going there. He also mentioned he's really been enjoying the Impact Wrestling program as of late, which I have as well. Granted, Anthem Sports and Entertainment is like 2 blocks from my place. So I do have sort of this hometown I'm rooting for Impact. I attended Slammiversary, thought it was amazing. Thought it was a great show. Loved Pentagon versus Sami Callihan. Thought that was an amazing match. So I'm sort of rooting for Impact. I thought Homecoming was a good show as well. Could Jericho still show up in Impact Wrestling? I think both Jericho and Kenny Omega would like that. They are friends with Don Callis, and that Winnipeg connection sort of unites them. However, I think if Jericho's All Elite Wrestling contract allowed for him to also compete for Impact Wrestling, he would have mentioned that when he mentioned that his contract does allow him to compete for New Japan Pro Wrestling. Though I could see a talent sharing arrangement between Impact and All Elite Wrestling taking place. You know, All Elite Wrestling would love to get guys like the Young Bucks on their show. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. It is one of the many questions in 2019 that is as of yet unanswered. So we'll keep you up to date with everything going on with All Elite Wrestling. Just make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any news or reports from Spoiler Free Wrestling. Thanks, everyone.